Some people might cherry pick certain episodes based upon the topic, and that's fine. But they know that when they come, they're going to get not only laid back fun, they're also going to get information and presented in a way that they understand.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
What's up, podcaster? It's your host, Adam Adams. And if you scroll down into the show notes today, you will see the bio for my guest, Bill Van Veghel. You will see his bio, any website that he wanted to share. The link to his podcast is clearly down into the show notes. So you can scroll down and you can actually check out his podcast, see what it's about. It is called Land of the Creeps. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have him on the show today is because he's got a lot of episodes that looks like I've played too many of them. I've played too many of them, so it doesn't show the time anymore, but some of them are like 3 hours, 4 hours, etc. So you never know how long it's going to be. And I think it's interesting. Some people ask, how long should an episode go? And the real true answer is it literally doesn't matter. There is successful podcasts that are 2, 3, 4 hours. There are successful podcasts 30 minutes to 1 hour, and there are successful podcasts 5 minutes to 20 minutes. So let's talk to Bill and find out a little bit about his show, why he does it, why it's long, in my opinion. I don't think he'll agree with me. But let's just jump in. Bill, your bio is already in the show notes, so no need to let us know all of your background, but I do want to go into your podcast. How long have you had the podcast and what keeps you at the podcast?
Well, to be upfront, I am a co-host. The podcast itself, Land of the Creeps, has been running since 2012.
Okay.
It's a podcast that reviews horror movies and horror TV shows that are of the genre. I was a listener and was asked to be a co-host in 2018. So I've been a co-host for the last 5 years. The format hasn't changed very much in the last 5 years. We've added a few things, and I know that you're going to get into the length of episodes. For us, anything under 3 hours is just not tenable. Every topic we do, it's going to be a minimum of 3 hours. And they can go up until 6 hours. Before I got on the show, our main host, Greg Morgan, had one episode that went 7 to 12 hours, something of that nature. So we usually pick a theme, and being a horror podcast, we will pick movies to review that will fill the time. We make sure we do. Like, one of the tips I give anybody that's going to do a long episode is make sure you have enough content to fill the time. And we have more than enough content. Horror movies or sci-fi movies or thriller movies, etc. There is an endless amount of content there.
Yeah.
And so our listeners love it when it's a longer type episode because it gets them through almost a whole shift at work. And they quite like listening. If it's only a 3-hour episode, we hear about it. They like the 4 to 5 to 6 hour episodes.
Wow. Interesting. Okay. So listen to that. For the listener, check this out. What is Bill saying? Like, is it real? Like, his person actually reaches out to him if it's 3 hours and they're like, not long enough. You need to fix this. I want more. And I think that that's an interesting thing where some people who have a podcast say it has to be 5 minutes or it has to be 20 or 35 or under an hour or whatever it is that is your rule. And some of these listeners also have a rule. They have a rule that it's, in a way, we'll call it a rule, loosey-goosey. It has to be more than 3 hours or else I'm going to complain. I'm actually going to reach out to Bill and the other co-hosts and let them know, WTF, why isn't this a little bit longer? So you mentioned, Bill, that you are a co-host. You joined the team 7 years after they started. And then you've been doing it for like 5 years. How many co-hosts are there? I've listened to a couple of episodes. I haven't listened to them in their entirety, the entire 4 or 5 hours in all of them, but I have listen to spots, especially the beginnings, especially the ends. And I think I hear like 4-ish voices. Tell us about that.
Yeah, there is Greg Morgan. Greg Amortis is the main host, and he's the one that kind of started this baby back in 2012. And he had done them prior to that. And we have 3 co-hosts with Greg, myself, Dave Becker, and Greg's wife, Pearl. And so between the 4 of us, we make sure that when we're on it, we have enough movies to cover over the time, and we go into analysis. And we also, another tip for anybody out there is we have a very strong audience engagement. We have, and you probably noticed as you were listening, Greg has a phone line listeners can call into, and we play them all.
Yeah, I did. Not on the episode that I was listening to today, but episode that I listened to like a month-ish ago. I absolutely recall that happening. I remember the phone line for sure.
And for example, in the last year, we've been doing one a month of our favorite horror movies for each year in the 80s. And those episodes are cherished by our listeners. They have nostalgia. They like those films. We will get 30 plus phone calls at 4 minutes a call. And we will also get people sending in voicemails that don't want to be cut off at 4 minutes and have to call back. We actually had to set up a rule of nobody can call in more than 3 times. We would have some callers call in 7, 8 times for one episode. So the audience engagement, they can't get enough. And we don't mind. We usually start recording at 7 p.m. They've been known to go till 12:30.
Yeah. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 30. That's like 6.5 hours?
5.5 hours.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
At that point, I've had times where I get up at 5 a.m. for work. So I say I have to leave off and they keep going.
Okay. So going back, you've been apart for a little while. Greg's there, Bill's there, Dave's there, and Pearl's there. Pearl is the wife of Greg or Dave?
Yes, the wife of Greg. She initially, when I first started, was not on, and she was kind of a behind the scenes, and she would put her 2 cents in here and there, and the audience loved her so much. And she's such a great person. She just naturally joined the crew.
That's cool. And you mentioned that you have a strong audience engagement, and you talked about how people call in. Is this show being monetized in any way, or is it more of like a fun thing?
It's simply for fun because the host, Greg, doesn't want to be tied down with what a sponsor wants to have put on. And we don't want our opinions to be altered based upon the fact of a sponsorship deal. Yeah. This is strictly for fun. I mean, we commit a lot of time and effort to do it, but quite frankly, and I mean, for anybody listening, if you're doing a podcast, it's got to be fun. And we want to give off the sense of we're sitting at the pub, having a couple pops and talking movies. We would do this just for us. And the fact that we have this many listeners is a testament to there's other people that think like us.
Why don't you guys try to monetize? And I never remember the term for it, but it's like Patreon or something like that, where people can donate, or people can, if they want, also pay for additional content, but people can donate to the podcast like $5 a month or whatever they want, $100 a month, $1 a month. Why don't you guys do something like that? Like, why doesn't Greg decide to look into that, or has he?
I know that we have done some things with Shudder.
What does that mean? What is Shudder?
Well, Shudder is a streaming service that does only horror and thriller type movies.
Oh, okay.
But it hasn't gotten to the point where we've done it enough to get monetized. Personally, I think we would be happy if they just said, talk about a few movies and you can get the service for free. We're happy with that. We're not looking to do anything better than just be a couple guys that are talking movies.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we could get, maybe a couple $100 a month and what have you. And I'm also the co-host of a podcast called Phantom Galaxy with my friend Nathan. And we've discussed that because we do science fiction, horror, documentaries, fantasy movies, etc. And we've brought that up, and that may come in the future. But as far as Land of the Creeps, people that are there, we've never broached it any more than just seeing if we can get something out of Shudder.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of it is, and I'm sure anybody here that's a podcaster knows, it takes a lot of time. That's an additional set of things we have to do with a limited time. Being a dad, being a sports fan, being a husband, working. I mean, it may seem like an extra 2 hours is nothing, but that's 2 hours that's taken away from my family.
Yeah. Well, let's move here a little bit. You mentioned a moment ago, if you're going to have a podcast, it's got to be fun.
Yep.
And I don't agree that it has to be fun, but I hope that it's fun. I think it benefits to be fun. I think it's really good for you and your soul if you're enjoying your podcast. And I also think it keeps audience engagement. So that's bringing me to a question. It's bringing me to a question like you guys have really strong audience engagement. You four have a lot of fun. You do make it like you're hanging out, having a beer, talking about this thing, that even you would record it practically the same way, like to mostly an extent. Of course, you wouldn't always be playing everybody's recordings or something like that if you were just having fun, but you are making sure that you're enjoying it. And your audience wants more than 3 hours, and that's why they sometimes get 4 or 5 or 6. So I'd like to chat about that a little bit on just keeping audience engagement.
I was just going to say, the one point I think of is I'm also a teacher. I teach elementary school.
Okay.
And the thing I always think of as a teacher and as a podcaster, if it's boring to me, it's going to be boring to them. So make it interesting for you, and hopefully they enjoy it as well, or at least they can give feedback and say, I like this, but you might want to do a little bit of that. And as a professional in both the teaching and the podcasting profession, you're always looking to get better. But you at least at the end of the day want to look back and say, did the audience enjoy it? Because I sure as heck did.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. With that in mind, as a teacher, as a podcaster of multiple podcasts for multiple years, what does our listener who's a podcaster, what do they need to take away on getting more fun and engagement out of the audience? What do we need to do to make it more interesting?
Well, what we like to do, and I'm sure other podcasters have their own ideas that we don't use, we like to get feedback in terms of email, a social media, a Facebook group, a phone line, intermittently have giveaways, contests involved. We've gone so far as we have a theme song at the beginning and the end. They were both audience generated. We held contests to see who could do a theme for the opening and who can do and we were only going to do the opening. We had so many good quality entrants that we used another one to be our outro. So we have audience members that are willing to put their time in to create for us as well. I mean, we get a good an hour and a half each episode that isn't us babbling. That is the audience. So, I mean, I think any podcast that wants to be successful on any level, and success could be anything. That could be 5 audience members. That could be 5,000 audience members. I'm not big on numbers. I don't get caught up on what's the trend, what are you on this chart, what are you on. Are you enjoying yourself and you having fun? And I find so many people get caught up, like you'll listen to the Facebook groups or you'll read them and they'll say, oh, I've only gotten 600 downloads in the last 3 months. Is that good? Who cares? How many people actually make podcasting their 100% soul living? A very, very small percentile. If you're with either you're a celebrity or you're with a large company that does it, like a CBS or something like that. Otherwise, just do it. And everything else will fall where they fall.
Cool. I like that. So just do it, enjoy it. And the other takeaways that I get for basically making it entertaining and engaging is that you have other ways to connect with the audience so that it's more of a community than it is just like a show by itself. So you mentioned a few things like email and social media, Facebook groups, that phone line that they can call in, and even making fun contests for the listener to be able to be a part of. So you're really building a community that's going to have people feel like they belong. And I think that's a big takeaway.
The other point of it is that a lot of the listeners that call in a lot, they've become our friends in terms of communicating through Facebook and such. And you asked one question kind of in, how do you get good guests? We have no short supply of guests because a lot of our guests are either listeners who give good opinions or listeners that have other podcasts. So we have our own network connected within, but we'll always say, like, some of the people that come on brand new as listeners who have been referred and, you know, someone likes it and tells them about it, they're amazed at how much engagement there is. And we just treat each other like family. Our Facebook group, like maybe twice in the last 5 years, has had to deal with stuff in the group with negativity. We don't have any time for it. Like, I know some groups you go into with 10,000 members and it's just nothing but people bashing each other. That is not us.
Really cool. Well, I know I'm going to talk in after our break. I'm going to talk about the challenges and tools that you guys use, challenges that you've had, and then tools that you use. As far as incorporating humor and or incorporating like being able to be authentic and funny and interesting, like the piece of the podcast that makes it fun for you to do and also fun for the listener to be able to be a part of. What are some of the ways you think your group does that with Greg, Dave, and Pearl?
Well, one of the things we do that I think the audience appreciates is like some podcasts go out there and they just kind of wing it. And I get it. You know, it's off the top of your head. It's authentic. And I'm not questioning anybody who does that. We keep it loose to a point, but we are also well researched. When we review a film, we dig deep. I mean, there are things that we won't know, but it won't be through lack of effort. So we make sure that the audience knows, yeah, they may be talking about, it might veer off into a 5-minute string of talking about music or something happened on our personal side. But we know the directors, we know the actors, we know what they did ahead of time, and we know what we did before that. And so if the audience kind of knows that you're with them and they feel like they can bring something to the table, but you also have your own opinion based upon facts of the film, and you've actually watched the films or read the articles or read the reviews or gone through Siskel and Ebert from 1982, they know that you're authentic, but you're real and you're bringing something to the table.
Yeah, that is good. How about on the humor part / the authenticity part? Like, the reason I bring this up is because sometimes podcasters are dry when they're podcasting, but when they're with their family or their friends, then they're not dry. They're excitable, they're funny, they're engaging, and you four, and plus your fans, become more of like a family where it feels really natural to do. Do you have any takeaway for a listener who's like, maybe struggling with how do I be my authentic self on my podcast instead of trying to be like more perfect, for example, than the average? I want to impress people versus I want to have fun with people.
The way I think we all kind of take it is the way we are on the air, I think is the way we are in real life. I don't think any of the four of us are putting up a brave front. Like I've heard stories of Howard Stern is one way on the air and then he's an introvert on the outside. I don't think that's the way we are. I think what you see and what you hear is what you get. And that works to our positive and at times to our detriment because you get to hear all our warts and all. Another thing that we do that we've started doing in the last year or so is at the end of the episode, we give them the outtakes. They hear where we messed up or they hear the pre-show ramble that they always used to say, what do you guys talk about before? We give it to them. So they can genuinely tell the authenticity. When I start singing Brandy, She's a Fine Wine, it's because I've heard the song on the radio and I'm hearing it and they get to hear it as well. So yeah. I've never known in 5 years or 6 years or whatever it is that I've done it, I've never known and walked away and go, that's not the way Dave normally does things, or that's not the way Greg. We're just friends and we're talking and we're recording. Sometimes we don't even realize we're recording. Dave once recorded while he was in the washroom. Didn't realize the recording was on.
Oh, that's funny.
So we are as authentic as you can get in terms of our personalities and what's presented to us.
Yeah. How do you not hold back? Let's just say like some people cuss, but they don't think they should cuss on their podcast. Or some people have humor, toilet humor, but they don't want to offend anyone or anything like that. What do we need to do to avoid being someone that we're not, like holding back, trying to impress? Is there anything else that you could share about cussing or toilet humor that you guys do on your show?
I can tell you the approach I take, and I'm pretty sure it's the same approach that the other boys take in Pearl. If anything, respectful. We will say that this is our opinion and we respect yours. but this is what ours is going to be. But we don't go over the line. We don't touch religion. We don't touch politics. We don't touch people of different social levels. We don't touch on ethnicity or anything of that nature unless it applies to the movie we're doing. We've talked a few times about Catholicism because it has to do with an exorcism film, or we might touch upon politics if it's within the storyline of the film. We don't care if you're left-wing, right-wing, centrist. What we like is our podcast is escapism. Who wants to be given a diatribe of left-wing versus right-wing, whatever, when all you will care about is our opinion on The Exorcist?
Yeah.
So we're respectful. We want different opinions, and we'll even take little jabs at each other, but they know that it's all in good fun. Like Dave will say to me, I know I'm a big fan of that streaming service, Tubi. I don't know if you've heard of Tubi. It's a free movie streaming service. And I'm always a big advocate of it. Some of the others are not. They'll say, Bill, blah, 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 blah. But they'll say at the end of the day, I respect what you like. And yeah, you know what? A couple good movies on there. So we will take women, men, different ethnicities. We have listeners in New Zealand. We have listeners in Germany who will call in and they feel safe and comfortable.
Yeah.
And so that's
cool.
the kind of environment we try to foster.
Let's take a quick break and then come back and talk about some of the challenges that you've seen and any tools that you would recommend to the listener. We'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, GrowYourShow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. We are back with Bill Van Veghel, and he's one of the co-hosts from Land of the Creeps, which is a podcast that is really, really long, if you ask me. And if you ask him, it doesn't feel long at all. It does not feel long at all. And I want to get into some challenges that they've had and also the tools that they use to overcome other things, make things easier. And first, Bill and I talked in the green room about like, what is it that makes or draws a certain listener to your podcast? What is it that brings them in? And I want Bill to kind of share that, and then we'll talk about the challenges and tools.
I think somebody that wants to come to listen to Land of the Creeps or Phantom Galaxy, and I'm also part contributor to the relaunched horror movie podcast, is somebody that is either a listener and a watcher of horror movies, or somebody that's been referred by a friend. You have no idea how many people we get, their brother, their coworker, somebody who knew somebody brought us in, and they'll listen and they generally stay. And I think the challenge is not just anybody can listen to an episode once. I think the challenge is keeping people there.
To listen to more episodes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think when we talked about audience engagement and non-judgmental and accepting everybody, and I mean, everybody has their own personal biases. Anybody who says they don't is lying. But I think that you can do it in such a way that it's respectful and people want to come, because some people want to listen because they want to be informed and they want to know something more about a particular topic. Some people might cherry pick certain episodes based upon the topic, and that's fine. But they know that when they come, they're going to get not only laid back fun, they're also going to get information and presented in a way that they understand. We're not getting into ratio aspects of movie film production. Yeah. We're telling you, why was there 7 gallons of blood that fell on so-and-so? So we keep it fun. We completely understand that 5 to 6 hours, even a 3-hour episode, is untenable for some people. But if you take 2 weeks, you listen to it 20 minutes while you're walking the dog or washing dishes or making mashed potatoes, we're good with that too.
Yeah. I was curious about, like, you are a teacher. Real quick, before asking the question, at what age do you teach? Like, who do you teach?
I am an elementary teacher, and I teach my entire school, grade JK to grade 8, music and drama.
Music and drama. Cool. And so I went through music education. So I have a degree in education as well. Mine is we learned how to teach mostly secondary education, but to get that degree, I had to do early childhood development and elementary ed. So like you kind of learn a little bit here and there. I believe that it benefits me when I'm teaching a lesson on something, like teaching somebody how to podcast. Earlier today, I spoke at a conference, but virtually. So I got to do it from my own
You got to do it in your
neighborhood.
track pants.
Yeah. Well, I wish. But yeah, I did that. And at the end, the feedback was like, he's one of the best speakers we've had, which, whatever. I don't really think that I'm like a speaker. I don't really think like that. But I do think that I'm more of a teacher. I'm more of somebody who's really passionate about trying to break it down for somebody and make it easily consumable. I do think that's been a benefit. So, and I'm curious, like, if you could, even though I didn't plan to ask you this question and you weren't even had to be prepared either, what about you and your elementary education teaching K through 8, I think you said music and drama, allows you to be better at podcasting on these two different podcasts that you are part of?
It's funny that, when I first got into podcasting, I did it just for the love of the topic and, I wanted to get to meet people. But professionally as a teacher, it does kind of blend in. Things like, and you would know this, chunking work. You chunk your work. You can also chunk your topics. You can speak to an audience with a lot more confidence. Having been in front of an audience for 20 years as a teacher is not a lot different than being in front of the microphone and speaking to an audience of 1,000 listeners.
Yeah.
You're projecting, but you also have to know how to self-edit.
What do you mean by that?
Because, for example, as a teacher, you can't tell them everything they know about osmosis. You're going to be there for 4 hours. By the same token, you can't tell them everything you know about the Evil Dead. It has to be interesting. It can't ramble on, and it has to get to the point, mister. And you have to know how to self-edit. When I first started, I had to learn that pretty quick. I thought I needed to impress the audience with everything I knew about the transformation in the American Werewolf in London. Now I realize I pick out the points that I think are salient, and the things I don't think would be interesting or engaging. I put myself in the head of the listener. Do I care about what he's talking about? If I talk too much, they don't care. They just tune you out like a student. You can tell that glazed over look in the eyes of a student when you've gone on too long. Same thing with a listener. When they get something talked about too much that at a certain point becomes redundant, you've gone too long. So you have to learn to self-edit and pick out the points you think are important. And the other ones you've left on the floor, maybe there's a reason you left them on the floor.
Yeah. That hurts me to do. I'm curious if it hurts you as well. Like today, I spoke for an hour and a half straight about podcasting. Like there was a few parts where I'm like, guys, I wish I could go into more detail about this. If you need it, give me a call. I can help you. It's like we would be here all day if I tried to give you all of the information about that one thing. And so for me, at least, it's a struggle because I like to teach. I want people to know all the stuff. And it hurts to self-edit for me. I'm curious if that same thing happens for you, like if anybody who's a natural born teacher just wants everybody to know everything, or if some of us, and maybe this is you, are already really, really good at selecting what is the most important things and what are the things that are less impactful.
I think it comes from, I've said that in our episodes that they're not scripted, but we do have outlines. And you can fill in those outlines with what you think, how long it'll take, and what you think are the most important points to talk about. Everything else you fit in if need be, or if you find them interesting or not. And sometimes these things are spontaneous. Sometimes thoughts pop in your head that you didn't even realize. Similar to if you're teaching a lesson, sometimes a student might say, what about doing it this way? Or have you thought about that? You go with it. And you can do the same thing in podcasting. It doesn't hurt my ego. It doesn't hurt me as a person to cut out something if I think it benefits the podcast. I mean, I have certain topics I'm very passionate about, and I can talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre for 4 hours. Nobody else wants to hear it. So I know that there are certain points you get to, and there are certain points, sometimes you let the audience discover on their own. You can lead them there, and then maybe with some audience feedback and a phone call or an email, they'll say, I like this, or I found out this, or I decided to watch that. as a result of something. You don't know how many times we get listeners say, I watched such and such a movie because you mentioned it. And so that makes me feel good, but that's not why I do it.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to this part and then we will wrap it up. What challenges do you and your partners in either of those two podcasts notice or have overcome over the last few years?
Well, I say professional. I'm not a professional, but on the podcasting level, there's a couple of challenges. One is scheduling, making sure, for example, on Land of the Creeps, we have one, Dave Becker has a job where he works different shifts and evenings. So we have to find a time and a date that works for all of us. And so then, sometimes it might be on a Tuesday night, sometimes it might be on a Thursday night, sometimes, so that's one of our challenges. I mean, another challenge of being a long play podcast is the amount of time. At a certain point, like I know after about 11:30, someone will say, what did I talk about? I don't have a bloody clue, because you're just going on autopilot and talking about what you know. So there's a challenge there. The challenge also is when you bring guests in, and this is something not a lot of podcasters talk about. When you bring a guest in, they might be nervous or they might have a nice plan laid out, and then it all goes off the hill once the lights go on. We had a guest the other day that's been a listener forever, and he has communicated back and forth with us for years. The moment he came on, he had a bit of a panic attack. Well, you have to learn on the fly to how to deal with that. And we just shifted, and Greg took over more of the questioning, and we got around it. And by the end, he felt okay. Or sometimes some guests might come on that tell us way more than we need to know because they feel the need to have to say everything they know about a particular topic. So you have to be able to gently tell a guest that's good. Similar to when we write report cards, there's 1,000 ways to tell me that your son is struggling. There's 1,000 ways to tell a guest that's great, but we need to move on. And so that's also a challenge of a podcaster. On a personal level, a challenge of a podcaster is balancing the life, work, podcasting triangle. You're a father, you're a husband. You have personal interests that are outside of podcasting. I'm a huge sports fan. My Saturdays are college football. Now that the hockey season there'll be NHL games at night. Sunday is my NFL. But at the same time, I could watch The Intruder while I'm watching the Packers versus the Bears. Like, you have to learn to multitask in this if you need to get all the hours in. I'm fortunate in a way that I don't do any of the editing, and I can only imagine how much extra that is for people that do the editing process. So it's what we love to do versus what we want to do versus what we can do.
Love, want, and can. That is interesting. So I'm looking at some of the challenges here. Scheduling can be a challenge, especially with lots of co-hosts or lots of guests, or, anytime you're having more than two people, it's going to amplify the difficultness. And so when you have 4 people and a guest or two, then it seems like it could be much more challenging. So scheduling, remembering where you are. If it's a longer episode and it's late at night, you're more likely to hit that. But still, finding ways of making sure that you're keeping notes, keeping track of what's been talked about, what you want to talk about can be important. I do that. Guests on your podcast, you didn't name everything bad that could happen with a guest, but there's a lot. Some of them might be shy. Some of them might come with a agenda. They want these things to happen, and it kind of could derail the show, or it could be more self-promotional, depending on the type of podcast.
The other thing we deal with sometimes with guests is they've been listeners for so long, it's like a dream for them to be on the show.
Yeah.
So then they kind of freeze up, or they're not sure what to say, what have you. You're kind of that sage on the stage, but you also give that gentle touch on the back. And so you have to learn how to get things out of guests that they might not necessarily know that they can actually get it.
I like that too. So you got to be able to help to control the conversation, be able to read the guest, be able to see what their fears are, or anything like that. I like the part about the TMI and gently telling guest, that's enough, that's good, let's move on. And I'm going to ask you if you could just give us a couple of ways that you do that, because I think it's really interesting. And then I thought it was cool. You said the work-life podcast triangle. Everybody else calls it the work-life balance. But then you add in, I'm also an influencer now. I'm also a podcaster now, then it becomes kind of like a triangle. So that it's just another thing to kind of add to it. And it can be done.
It's just another layer.
It can be done. And you even mentioned how sometimes you'll be watching the movie that you wanted to watch and having the game on so you can keep track of the game and kind of doing duo tasking. Good stuff. I'm going to ask you about some tools, if there are any that you use to make it easier on you. Prior to that, is there a common way that you gently tell a guest that they're kind of going on too much?
Now, the fortunate part of being a longer podcast is we usually have a large agenda of things to get to. So you can gently, suggest that this topic has kind of run its course. We've got something else we got to get to. Like, for example, We just watched all 6 and reviewed the Scream franchise. Well, it took us an hour and a half to get through Scream 1. We had to whip through the next set. And so it's just a matter of logistics. You can't spend too long on any one topic because you need to move on. Or you can suggest that we've already overstayed our welcome on a topic. Let's get to something new. Oh, by the way, let's hear what Raul has to say in Utah. Let's get to his phone call. And the advantage of a show like that, whereas it would be more of a challenge if it's a one-on-one show that's half an hour, because you're basically putting them on the spot and saying, okay, we don't want to hear about cryptocurrency. Let's talk about Islam in Asia or whatever. Ours kind of lends itself to that flow, but I can imagine somebody that's a singular topic, short stay podcast, it might get awkward at times.
I'm writing down a couple ways that I do it as well. So you mentioned, this has run its course and we need to get to blank. Sometimes I'll interrupt somebody and I'll say, hey, let me interrupt you. I want to ask you about, and then I just change the conversation.
Oh, look, there's a squirrel.
And I have found that I really like the one, let me interrupt you. I want to ask you about this other thing. I found that I like that a lot. I think it just feels very authentic. It feels good inside when I do it that way. And then another one that I'll use sometimes is, I like where you're going with that. I think that the listener would like to ask, I think that the listener's probably wondering, so I'll be like, I like where you're going with that. Then I'll say, I think the listener's probably wondering how you started, or I think the listener's probably wondering what ended up happening with her. Something where it's like, bro, you're going way too effing long on this and we got to skip some stuff. So it's like, I like where you're going with that. What's the point? I like where we're going with that. I think the listener's thinking, why does this matter to me? And it sounds rude. It sounds rude. Why does this matter to my effing listener? That's what you want to say. None of this matters to my listener, but how you say it is, I like where you're going with that. I think the listener's wondering, what are they gaining from this?
I was going to say, I like how you do that because you still keep it guest centered, but you're shifting the conversation.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. You're still keeping them in the spotlight, but you're just going slightly to the left or to the right, as opposed to down a path that will take you somewhere you didn't intend or want to go.
Yeah. And I think to be a good host, we need to be able to control the conversation. It can be frustrating to have to sit there as a host and just be like, when is this guest going to shut up? I've thought that at least 100 times out of 1,000 episodes. I've thought that at least 100 times. And I've learned to just be like, hey, let me interrupt you. I want to ask you about this other thing. Or, hey, I like where you're going with that. I think the listener's wondering about this other part. And then yours was, this has run its course and we need to get to this other thing. How about the tools? We will end, Bill, with any tools that make your life easier as a podcast that you use.
Okay. Well, before we get to that, just one thing I thought about with the interview, the one exception might be is if you have an engaging guest that is of a certain status that people will listen to whatever they have to say. So like we might have an actor on that, just let them go.
Yeah.
If you had, depending on whatever topic it is, politics, sports, music, if you got Ryan, what's his name? The Canadian guy,
Ryan Reynolds?
Ryan Reynolds. If you had Ryan Reynolds on,
my kids love him.
He could talk about cutting onions for 45 minutes and we'd record it. Like it's the kind of thing where sometimes you have to give in to the guest, but 95% of the times, no.
Okay. That's a good takeaway. How about the tools?
The tools. There's a couple things we use. Don't be afraid to use apps that are applicable. I watch between 300 to 400 movies a year. And so we have an app called Letterboxd that literally tracks it for me. I give a rating, it breaks it down by year and genre. And if I have to flip back to see what movies I've watched from the year 1974, I can flip to it and it'll tell me. Now, so there's apps, and no matter what topic you're going into, I'm sure you can get to. The other tools I use, like my microphone right now is a Blue Yeti. I used to have a much more inexpensive one before. I ponied up to get one, no complaints at all. I have Shure headphones. Again, being within 5 years, I don't know all the ins and outs of what's this. This one had good ratings. I got a good deal on it in Amazon, no complaints. So anybody who's starting out, no, you don't need to spend $800 on equipment. But as you become established and successful, it doesn't have to be the top Apple product, but it does have to be reliable and of a certain quality that doesn't sound like you're doing it in your garage.
With your Blue Yeti, it's a condenser mic, and most of the time condenser mics are so sensitive you can hear lots of things, especially echoes and rustling and things like that. With you in particular, I don't hear that as much, and I'm curious if you have like some type of sound dampening thing close to the mic, or how do you treat the room to make it not so echoey like most of the time when people use that mic?
I tell my daughter to stay upstairs. That's what I do.
Okay. Is it like a carpeted room?
It's a carpeted room, and my office chair has one of the plastic sliders on the bottom. But it is nothing special. I have a laptop, and this may be another tip for listeners. I have a laptop that's pretty much solely dedicated to podcasting. I'm not downloading weird movies. I don't have MP3s of things of, the latest pop song. It's a dedicated podcast, basically, unless I'm just perusing through looking for research or something. I don't use my downstairs laptop for anything other than podcasting. So it minimizes viruses, it minimizes weird software that sometimes attaches itself. And like, I was on a guest on a podcast the other day, and the host of the show kept getting some weird McAfee pop-up that would come up. If you do something where that's your only equipment for what you're doing, that will minimize that occurrence.
Yeah. I will say, because we have a whole bunch of microphones that we suggest, and none of them are the Blue Yeti. And I think it's just because, and it's not just because, I think there's a lot of reasons, but probably the number one reason for bad audio quality with most people in most cases is that they're never recording where their mouth is close enough to their mic, and you are right at the mic, you're right there. And other people like put it on their desk kind of far away. It's not even in the screen. And then it sounds really bad, especially on something that's more of like a condenser mic. But
I was going to say, I think it has to do with when I drive my car.
Yeah.
I'm right up to it.
Okay. So, you're like my grandma.
I'll take that as a compliment. Hey, grandma.
I'm just messing with you, man. I'm just messing. All right. So let's any other tool that you want to share?
No, I don't think so. Don't be afraid of technology, but also don't go overarching to get the next latest whatever. Use what works for you.
Cool. Speaking of technology, this is the first time I'll share this publicly. We found out that there is AI that can make your own personal voice speak in a different language on a podcast. So this podcast will hopefully, at least my solo episodes, hopefully, can be translated into Spanish soon. And you can hear it in Spanish. I'm looking forward to that. That's the one thing you're like, don't go right into it, but I want to be on the cutting edge of being in some Mandarin or Spanish or French or something.
Hopefully to your Spanish speaking listeners, I sound okay.
Oh, yeah. And I don't know for sure if I'll know how to do interviews. I don't know for sure if I'll be able to do that, but the solos, I'm confident we'll be there soon. So anyway, Bill Van Veghel from Land of the Creeps and also another podcast. Did you give us both links? I
gave you links to Land of the Creeps. I gave you links to Phantom Galaxy. I also gave you links to Horror Movie Podcast. Okay.
So all three actually are in the show notes now. And so scroll down, check him out, check out what he's got going on. And the next episode is a little bit shorter than this one. It's just going to be you and me pouring into you something that I know you need. So don't even go anywhere. I'll see you on the next episode. You know, I really don't say this nearly enough. I don't mention this, and I feel horrible because it's a great resource for you to be able to take your podcast to the next level. And it's simply a free resource that I don't need your email or anything. It's just a podcasting course that I created that is ended up putting in the very first 6 episodes of this podcast. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely going to want to just check out those first 6 episodes, see how they can help you improve your podcast, get in front of more people, and have a better result where you're making more money through the podcast, etc. So much can happen after you listen through episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if you haven't done it, go do it now. And by the way, if you're subscribed, you'll keep hearing more great content. So to those of you who are, I'll see you on the next episode.